nimeitika, nimeitwa na Yesu, unitume popote, nimeitwa na Yesu, nami nimeitika, nimeitwa na Yesu, unitume popote. Mimi ni chombo chako, chombo cha Bwana, nikutumikie. Mimi ni chombo chako, chombo cha Bwana, nikutumikie. Unitume popote, nimeitwa na Yesu, nami nimeitika, nimeitwa na Yesu, unitume popote. Mimi ni chombo chako, chombo cha Bwana, nikutumikie. Mimi ni chombo chako, chombo cha Bwana, nikutumikie.
This is our symposium on understanding new wine in new wineskins. Before we start, I invite brothers from St. John of God to start with a hymn, and then we will have an opening prayer from Sister Jao.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. L'Esprit de Dieu repose sur moi. L'Esprit de Dieu m'a consacré. L'Esprit de Dieu m'a envoyé proclamer la
God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. We thank you for the gift of life you have granted to us, for bringing us together once more to learn what you have for us in this symposium on new wine, new wineskin. We ask for the gift of Holy Spirit on all the facilitators and all the participants of today, that all we will do today will be accordance to the Holy Spirit. We ask this through Christ our Lord. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, brothers and sisters, for that short prayer. I invite Father Remedius, the director of the Institute of Spirituality, to introduce to us the guests whom we have around here with us.
I am very happy to see you here, and we are delighted because of your response to our invitation to drink new wine in new wineskins. So, but as we have our father here who is present with us, the VC designate of Tangaza University, so to speak, I invite him to say a word of welcome to you all.
My dear friends, the superior generals of the various congregations and institutes, I wish also to recognize the presence of the Dean School of Theology, and also to recognize the presence of ISRIF, who are in conjunction with the Daughters of St. Paul, have organized this symposium for Tangaza University and for all of you. All the protocols of served. Good morning. I take this opportunity to welcome all of you to Tangaza University. It gives me great pleasure to see you present in this great institute, in this great family. Even Brother Cruz, who is a saint maker, is around and is going to make saints of all of you. And so it is really wonderful that in accordance with our mission and vision to teach minds, to touch hearts, and to transform lives, that we can be able to gather together in this great theme of new wine in new wineskins. We also hope maybe later to hear from Cardinal Joao Luis Awiz, the one in charge of the congregation for the Institute of Consecrated Life, and as a feedback to our symposium today at Tangaza. I also wish to recognize the presence of Brother Cruz now officially, and Sister Maria Feliz, who have been organizing this particular day for us. But for a start, when we talk about the new wine and new wineskins, I think it is derived from Mark 2:22, when Jesus talked about not mixing the new and the old and the new. The same thing was taken over by Darwin over 1,500 years later, when he brought the issue and the theory of evolution and said who fits and who can survive in the present times and across durations. And he said it is only the fittest. And the fittest, according to me, who can survive for the time, is the one who is capable of adaptation. We need to adapt, and the adaptation demands new skills, new spiritualities that are very much required in today's culture. And maybe the reason for this, I don't know whether we have been drinking the old wine or we have been poured into the old wine. I don't know what is the paradox. Maybe I would like you to put an answer and give it to me before you leave. But Brother Cruz, who is leading this, I'm sure will explain that clearly, because we need to analyze, to carry out an assessment and an evaluation to recognize what are we doing. And I remember that it was, I think, on 10th of September 2014, that the Pope talked about the same thing, that evangelization must be carried out to the people of the contemporary culture. We should be cognizant of the changing philosophies. We should be cognizant of the changing technologies. We should be cognizant of the changing worldviews. We should be cognizant of the changing ways of thought and behavior of our own people and their cognitive interpretation of religion. If we do that, we may be the old wineskins or the old wine pouring wine into the new wineskins, and what will happen is that we'll burst. And I am happy that this theme has been brought today, because we have found a lot of influence of secularism, a lot of people leaving the church and not taking our lead in the issues of formation, religion, and understanding what it means to be a good Christian, to be a good person of faith. And therefore, let us ask that these today's interventions by our great speakers during this symposium will bring us so much. Me, I was given a topic I refused, because I am just a diocesan priest, and I am transitioning to be a religious. So I am becoming the 23rd religious founder of Tangaza University College as we transition to a university. Finally, may I continue to welcome you to take advantage of our studies, of our ambience and resources at Tangaza. You don't need really to come and study, but if you have time, come and use our resources. We have just updated our ERP system, our digital system, and our library is extremely fast. And you can come and take a day or two, and we will book you in the hostels in our bank, and you can study and renew yourself. We also wish to let you know that I sent 2 priests, the Dean of Theology and Father Manyante to Rome, and they have come back with good news that we should be mounting our philosophy from September, recognized as an affiliation of Urbaniana University. So maybe from August, please send also your people to study philosophy and theology at Tangaza University. We are also in the process of transitioning to a full-fledged university. The only thing that is keeping us between us and the chapter is the size of land. We sit on a 10.5 acres, but we have appealed to the government. I met the CS Education last year, and we also sent an appeal that they may reconsider the regulations that were put in 2014 so that we can be chartered. We have also invited the chair of the commission here, and he appreciates that actually we should be chartered. So we are making all the necessary efforts so that in the near future, your degrees will be reading Tangaza University. And this will be wonderful, because this is a missionary institute. This is where there is a lot of linkages and partnerships, and I get very good responses from students from various congregations who study here, and they meet in other countries, in other continents, and because of being in Tangaza, they create wonderful pastoral networks and developmental networks. So we look forward to when we shall be fully chartered, so that we can celebrate the University of the Missionary Church in the world here in Nairobi. So with those few words, may I take this opportunity to welcome you, feel at home, and as I have said, seriously be visiting us. Even if you want to read on anything, we welcome you. We'll give you lunch. At least if the financial manager doesn't accept, I'll give you from my pocket. Thank you very much. God bless you and enjoy the day.
It is always good to be in touch with our fathers. And we thought of connecting to Rome those who are in charge of the Congregation for Institute of Consecrated Life and Society of Apostolic Life. And we wanted this symposium to be opened by a message from Cardinal Bras de Avis. And we did everything we could, but due to technological challenges, we couldn't have it displayed here. We wanted him to talk to people gathered in Tangaza College today. And then we relay it as he's talking from Rome. But due to technical challenges, we couldn't get that going. You can see that in our program. But this message is to assure you that they have our goodwill as you are gathered here, and to inform you all that as we have failed in doing so due to technical and technological difficulties, nonetheless, please be aware that both Cardinal Bras de Avis and Archbishop Caballo want to extend to you their greetings and happiness at your participation in this important assembly. Attempts will be made to fix the problems we have encountered in transmitting the video messages. Be assured, nonetheless, of the spiritual unity and communion of both superiors of the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life, and the blessings they extend to you all who are present here today, and to your brothers and sisters in the consecrated life. So with this short message of assurance of their blessing, I invite Brother Cruz to lead us through the process. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My voice is quite hoarse, as you may hear. The Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life received a lot of complaints because of the poor quality of the translation, as well as the high cost of the document, particularly for those in places like Africa. Some of you may remember that originally it was being sold at 900 shillings a piece. Okay? But because of all these complaints, the superiors of the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life had asked two individuals, including me, to actually redo the translation. Okay? This prompted, therefore, the improved translation that was published by the Daughters of St. Paul in Africa in January 2018. So you will see that this translation was made by one daughter of St. Paul, Sister Bernadette Rees, who is in the Vatican, and myself. And I believe it was February or January, Sister? When in February, the new translation was made available for 200 shillings? 200 shillings. So definitely much more affordable to everyone. Okay. So, since becoming available, however, New Wine in New Wineskins has caused quite a stir among consecrated persons. Let me just give you an example of what I mean by this. In June of last year, while I was in Rome, I was actually at the bookshop of the Vatican Publishing House because it was my first time to get an actual copy of this document in Italian. And I remember that as I was browsing through my copy, another sister, a sister was next to me, an Italian sister. And as she was browsing, she was saying the following things. Oh Dio mio. Which means, oh my God. And every time she browsed through it, she was saying, oh Dio mio, que peccato. What it means is that, what it shows is actually a reaction from one sister that is getting registered in many consecrated persons, particularly those that are in general governments. And why are the reactions quite strong? because the document is quite candid in its observations about the way the consecrated life is being practiced in our days. But moreover, the document was noted for its fearless critique of various practices that have developed within the consecrated life since the end of Vatican II. So, in fact, the tone of New Wine in New Wineskins is uncharacteristically bold and frank for a church document. Normally, when we encounter a church document, it tends to be quite theoretical, okay? Almost to the point that it cannot be understood. But this document is so clear, so lucid, and because it is so clear and lucid, it tends to hit us in the gut level. Because what it is saying is actually issues that you and I can relate, and issues that the Holy See itself is saying are problems. So what basically is happening is this: whatever observations we had been talking among ourselves as consecrated persons regarding issues in formation, regarding issues of governance, regarding issues of relationships, they are now being acknowledged by the Holy See as real issues. And therefore, what we are speaking in the dark are now being spoken of loudly in the light. What the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life is asking consecrated persons is to let New Wine in New Wineskins to accompany them in assessing both the wineskins and the wine produced by their congregations 50 years after the end of the Second Vatican Council, but to assess them with paresia. And this is a very crucial concept in this particular document. Okay? Paresia is a word that you will see from the beginning to the end of the document. Paresia means to speak candidly, to speak boldly, to speak without fear. So this is why the document is quite amazing in so many ways, because it is basically giving us the permission to speak with frankness and with boldness about the situations we are facing in our religious institutes. And instead of speaking about them quietly, we have to speak about these issues boldly, frankly, candidly. I hope you understand the point. Huh? The word paresia is in fact quite interesting because it is a word that was taken by the writers of the document and was called from the Acts of the Apostles. In both Acts chapter 2:29 and Acts chapter 4:13, the word paresia was used to describe the way the apostles preached with boldness, without fear, and with candidness. So this is what the document is asking from us, consecrated persons, to speak about the issues confronting the consecrated life with boldness, frankness, and candidness. Likewise, the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life presents New Wine in New Wineskins as orientamenti. So this is the Italian word that is used, orientamenti. We translated it in the way it's usually translated in English, guidelines. Okay? However, let's bear this in mind. The word orientamenti in Italian suggests that these guidelines seek to reorient or redirect consecrated persons towards the new paradigm born out of inspiration and the post-conciliar practice. be they in terms of identity, life in communion, formation, or governance. So, the word guideline can come across to us as a rather cold word, okay? Meaning just regulations. But what the document is trying to say is that our life must be reoriented toward a new paradigm of the consecrated life that the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life, in behalf of the Holy See, would like us to fully embrace. To redirect our life so that our congregations are living the new paradigm of the consecrated life. And that is quite an amazing challenge in a lot of ways. The usage of the word paradigm, I was told, was very purposeful. Because what it suggests is that we are moving from one model to a new model of the consecrated life. And whatever is in between the two models cannot be fit into the new model. So that's quite interesting in a lot of ways. The document New Wine in New Wineskin takes its cue from a parable present in all the four synoptic gospels. The version that was used, however, by the document to become the framework is that from the Gospel of Mark. So let's read what the Gospel of Mark says about this parable. No one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the skins are ruined. All new wine is for new wineskins. New wine is for new wineskins. So through this parable, Jesus is warning his disciples about the temptation, and please pay attention to him, about the temptation of wanting to harmonize the freshness and vitality of his message with old structures, practices, and ideas. So the parable is not a simple story. The parable is presented in the Gospels as a warning to avoid a particular temptation to mix the old and the new, to think that the old can fit with the new. To be more frank, New Wine in New Wineskins shows its boldness in asserting that what worked for the old paradigm of the consecrated life does not fit in the new paradigm. Please remember that. What worked for the old paradigm of the consecrated life no longer works in the new paradigm. In number 56 of the document, it says it quite clearly. Old and new do not go together because each one pertains to its own season. Please remember that, because this is why many who have read the document can feel both the challenge and the reason why the document is frightening. Because what it is saying is basically that old and new cannot come together. Old and new cannot come together. Therefore, what the Holy See is asking from consecrated persons is quite revolutionary. We have to shift from the old paradigm of the consecrated life to its new paradigm. So in sociology, we use that term, paradigm shift. Okay? What it means is that whatever models used to work can no longer work and should not be forced to work in the new paradigm. And this is where the document really becomes quite strong. It's insisting that we cannot mix old and new together. In order for us to understand the repercussions of this document, let me give to you, for example, two quotes from two officials of the Congregation for the Institutes of Consecrated Life. In introductions they have made to audiences like this regarding this document. One of them is Father Sebastiano Pacciola, a Trappist, one of the two undersecretaries of the congregation. He said the following: "New Wine in New Wineskins may come across as an extremely simple book to read. However, it is difficult in its concrete application within a congregation. The guidelines are to be appropriated accordingly to the charisms in each institute or society. This appropriation is not only a process, pay attention, that should conclude with the revision of the constitutions." Okay? So one of the expectations is this document should provoke all congregations to revise their current constitutions. So already you can feel why it's frightening people. But it's also supposed to bring about the revitalization of the life within the entire congregation. So just imagine what this document is asking, okay? Constitutions that we have been teaching and practicing are expected to be revised in the spirit of new wine in new wineskins. It's a very tall order from the Holy See. The hope is that in doing so, some revitalization can take place in religious congregations. Cardinal João Bras de Avis also spoke about his understanding of what is being called for in this document in the following ways. Quote, "Many questions will arise out of this document. We are invited to find responses to these questions. Some of these answers are already in the post-conciliar understanding of the consecrated life. An important word that accompanies us in discerning the answers is reform. The consecrated life is in a time of reform, whose center is the person of Christ." So it's quite interesting when you try to also think that the document was published on the 500th anniversary of the Reformation in the church. So it's not something, therefore, that we can take quite lightly. What the document is asking is the reform of religious communities. Because the Holy See, 50 years after the end of the Council, have realized that many of us have somehow lost our direction. What we think of as the consecrated life may not necessarily be what is in the mind of the Holy See, not necessarily in the mind of Pope Francis himself. And it's quite interesting to always remember that the document came out just when the Pope himself is a consecrated person. So that's why there has been this abundance of the publication of documents in this particular pontificate, something that we cannot take for granted. So let's try to understand what is going on in this document. It's using two images to help us to understand the direction that we are supposed to take. There is new wine on one hand, and there is new wineskins on the other hand. The document is inviting every congregation to find the proper way to embody the new wineskins that would receive the new wine brought about by the accommodatio renovatio, that is the adaptation and renewal of the consecrated life after Vatican II, and the revitalization of the charisms present in each religious institute or society of apostolic life. The document is using two particular imageries to help us to understand what it is that we should assess together in our congregations. Whether we are embodying the new wineskin and whether we are pouring into the new wineskin new wine. Okay? So that is quite interesting. That is the very point that this document is trying to say. New Wine in New Wineskins is speaking of the existence of a new paradigm of the consecrated life, born out of the inspiration of the post-conciliar praxis. Okay? What it means then is that there is something about the consecrated life that is new. And this new paradigm is allegorized in New Wine in New Wineskins as the new wineskins of the consecrated life. Okay? What the church is trying to tell us is that there is a certain new paradigm that exists. And let's think of this new paradigm as the new wineskins. To understand this new paradigm, however, we must comprehend the old paradigm. The old paradigm of the consecrated life before Vatican II, which, interestingly enough, was characterized by New Wine in New Wineskins as the old wineskins of centuries-old religious schemes which are incapable of opening themselves to new promises. So, in quite a strong statement, what the church is trying to say is that the old paradigms of the consecrated life cannot work today because they are incapable of opening themselves to the new promises. The question is, what is the old paradigm? Okay? What is the old paradigm? Now, in describing the old paradigm, I need you to be alert likewise, because sometimes, as we would say, when the speaker says something, he inadvertently might be throwing stones at you, and you might find yourself being hit. Okay? I'm not purposely doing that, but it's what's important for us to know is that the descriptions being made may actually be ones that you're familiar with, not because they were historically real to you, but they are actually real to you today. So let's talk about the old paradigm. The old paradigm of the consecrated life is one that can be seen according to 8 particular characters. First, in terms of identity. The old paradigm understood the identity of the consecrated life as a state of perfection, meaning that it incorporates into its membership men and women who were specially destined by God to be perfect. And that is why, if you remember, during preconciliar times, and even some years after the preconciliar times, we were being taught how to behave perfectly, how to stand perfectly, how to eat perfectly, how to speak perfectly. Okay? Because we are supposed to be the embodiment of perfect people. In terms of radicality, meaning how the consecrated life was rooted in the past, in the old paradigm, little to no reference was made to the origins or even to the founders. So little or no reference was made. It can vary. In some congregations, there was a certain sense of the importance of the founder. But at times it was the experience of the founder in encountering the inspiring Spirit was fully taught. In terms of spirituality, the spirituality of pre-conciliar times was marked by routine. Okay? There was a certain way of praying, and it was a way of praying that cannot be violated. A certain way of behaving during prayer that cannot be violated. Otherwise, it's considered as a manifestation of imperfection. Thus, the prayer life became more of like an experience of being a wheel in a machine, wherein consecrated persons simply prayed because they had to pray. In terms of orientation, the preconciliar understanding or the preconciliar model is institutional stability. Orientation speaks of how it sees itself or how it prepares itself for the future. The future of the congregation is one that is marked by institutional stability. We must be sure that we have money even though we vow poverty. We must have the means. We must have the institutions. Scope, meaning how did the consecrated life see its primary purpose? The scope was primarily functional, to teach, to nurse, to give retreats. It was more seen in the aspect of doing. In terms of self-understanding, the consecrated life was understood in a generic manner. What it means was this: how each congregation understood the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and how to live the common life tends to be the same in each congregation. That is what we mean by generic. There was no sense of a certain difference in each congregation. In terms of governance, the model is pyramidal. There are those that are on top, and there were those that are on the bottom. Likewise, what is quite interesting is that it did not give room for common discernment on the part of those in the service of authority and for those that are in membership. And finally, in terms of relational dynamics. In the old paradigm, the relational dynamics was quite stratified. There were many congregations, particularly for women, that were really stratified. They had choir sisters and they had lay sisters. And if you're a lay sister, you know that you can never be a superior. You know that you could never study. But even if the congregation is not stratified, there is a sense of those that are higher and those that are lower. The educated ones and the non-educated ones. In congregations of men, this was quite strong, particularly in congregations that are mixed. There are the priests and there are the brothers, and the brothers know their place. Every day, they are reminded of what place they are in. But even in congregations of brothers, there was also a stratification. In some congregations, you had the teaching brothers and the working brothers. And if you're a working brother, it means that, well, your intelligence level is not one where you can qualify as a teaching brother. So I hope you understand, okay? Now, let's pause and look at what we have there. And try to say, is my congregation still in that mindset? Maybe not in all, but are there particular characteristics of the old paradigm that we are showing in here that you can see are ones that are actually still being lived in your congregation. Okay. So, we now move to the new paradigm. Okay? It is very clear in the beginning of the document that the church is advocating for the moving of religious congregations from the old paradigm to the new paradigm. However, readers of New Wine in New Wineskin note that the document is really not explicit in characterizing the new wineskins. Okay. Now, why is the question is why? The reason being given by the Congregation for the Institute of Consecrated Life is this. We have already told you what it means to be in the new paradigm, but very few are listening. The presupposition on the guidelines is that the readers are attuned to the 2 conciliar, 5 papal, and 18 dicasterial documents on the consecrated life, which preceded the publication of New Wine in New Wineskins, as well as the provision and the problematics of the 1983 Code of Canon Law on the consecrated life, and the many discourses on the consecrated life that are being given by Pope Francis. Now, of course, we can say, oh, we're too busy to actually pay attention to this. So let's leave it to people who are teaching theology to be the ones to do this. But this is where the problem is, my dear brothers and sisters. If we don't read these documents, we won't understand where the church is trying to lead us. And I know that in the period of time given to us right now, there will be no way for us to actually read all these documents. Because if you look at them, they are many, ranging from the conciliar documents published by the council, to the papal documents published by successive popes since the close of the council, and by the dicasterial documents. Just think, for example, have you read these documents individually and as a congregation? Okay? Of the conciliar documents, how familiar are we with Lumen Gentium? And particularly with Perfecte Caritatis. Okay? We are reading many things, but not necessarily the documents that are supposed to help us to understand the new paradigm. But it's not only the conciliar documents. Several papal documents had already been published, beginning with Evangelica Testificatio in 1971, Redemptionis Donum, Vita Consecrata, which I assume many have read, even if we don't fully understand it. Then there is the Apostolic Letter to all consecrated persons, also known as Witnesses of Joy. And lastly, a document that, although particularly focused on nuns, is a very important document to read called Vultum Dei Quaerere, Seeking the Face of God. But it's the next set of documents that are quite crucial also to read. The documents that were published by the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life. And I don't want you to feel overwhelmed, but they are quite many. Beginning with Venite Seorsum, Mutuae Relationes, which is a very important document in understanding what charisms are in the consecrated life. Religious and human promotion, the contemplative dimension of religious life, the essential elements in the church's teaching on religious life. How are you doing with the checkboard? With the checking? I mean, how many of you have read so far? Okay. Then there's the directives on formation. This document, the masterpiece, Fraternal Life in Community, although published in 1994, I can assure you, if you read it, it seems to be speaking to us today. Okay? Inter-institute collaboration for formation, instruction on the contemplative life, starting afresh from Christ, and for those of us that are in government, the service of authority and obedience, a very crucial document for those that are in government. Now, all that I've shown to you are those before Pope Francis. Let's look now at those published since Pope Francis came. Since Pope Francis came, first came the Guidelines for the Administration of Assets. Okay, it's a short document, but it's very compelling. Rejoice. Okay, so you can start saying, I read Rejoice. Keep watch. I read Keep Watch up to half. Keep watch. Contemplate. Proclaim. Then the identity and mission of the religious brother in the church. Don't be deceived by the title. Because the document says in number 2, although this document is primarily for brothers, what applies to the brothers mostly apply also to sisters. Therefore, they should read it. And then new wine in new wineskins. But just to show you, after new wine in new wineskins, it looks like the Holy See has not had enough. It issued, a few months afterward, a document called Consecration and Secularity. And a few weeks ago, no, actually a week ago, it published Economy in the Service of Charism and Mission, which the Daughters of St. Paul are going to publish soon. Okay? So now you might think, oh please, that's it, that's enough. Actually, there are 3 more that are coming out. So why this quite strong attention to the consecrated life? Because the Holy See understands the particular value and uniqueness of the consecrated life for the church as a whole. And if the consecrated persons themselves don't understand the life, we can get lost and we can bring others also to be lost. Are speaking of the so-called new paradigm of the consecrated life. Okay? So now the question is, what are the characteristics of the new paradigm? The characteristics that are not clearly stated in New Wine in New Wineskins, but are clearly stated in the earlier documents of the church. First, let's look at identity. From the old paradigm of state of perfection, the new paradigm is prophetic. We can gather this from Vita Consecrata, from seeing itself and its members as special individuals called to a life of perfection. The consecrated life today fearlessly denounces, even at the risk of martyrdom, all that is contrary to the divine will, explores new ways to apply the gospel in the present world, and manifest a way of living that anticipates and points to the coming kingdom of God. We are not self-appointed prophets, but we are prophets by nature in the consecrated life. Our life is supposed to be one of courage, even at the risk of losing our life. Without that courage, there is no prophetism in the consecrated life. But more than that, our life is supposed to point out to the people that see us how the kingdom of God would look like when it is fulfilled. Through us, they can see how in the kingdom of God all are relating to each other with love and equality. When they see us, when they see how we live community, they are supposed to see how the kingdom of God looks like. But as some of us know, unfortunately, how sometimes people see us is more like purgatory. So, the new identity is prophetic. In terms of radicality, the new paradigm is charismatic. The new paradigm of the consecrated life in terms of radicality is charismatic. This we will see in the document Mutuae Relationes. From operating without any consideration for their origins and founders, consecrated persons today must be guided by the unique inspiration from the Holy Spirit that was recognized and lived by the founders of their congregations. Moreover, consecrated persons should always be rooted in their congregation's foundational charism, which they are called to live, safeguard, deepen, and constantly develop. Okay? Now let's look at the next one. Spirituality. Spirituality. The new paradigm is contemplative. A spirituality that is contemplative. What it means is this: from engaging in a life of prayer that is routine and lifeless, consecrated men and women today are called, possibly now more than ever, to be prophets, mystics, and contemplatives, to discover the signs of God's presence in everyday life, and to become wise representatives of the kingdom, who know how to recognize the questions that God and humanity ask throughout history. The church is not saying that we're not supposed to pray together in chorus or to engage in spiritual exercises. That is the congregation's call. But whatever exercises we do are supposed to lead us to a true contemplative life as consecrated persons. No longer can those of us who are in apostolic congregations say, "But I'm not contemplative." No. Every religious congregation is both apostolic and contemplative. Now let's look at the next one, orientation. From institutional stability, the new paradigm is that which is called liminal. Liminal. And this is a very interesting position on the part of the Holy See. This is why the document Keep Watch is very difficult to read, especially if you read it with an understanding that the consecrated life has to do with stability. Because according to Keep Watch, it's not about stability, but about liminality. What does that mean? From being obsessed with institutional stability, consecrated persons, because they are not part of the church's hierarchical structure, are called to settle and move like the people of Israel during the Exodus, who are responding to the unpredictable movement of the cloud, and to preserve faith in God's protective presence when stops become lengthy and the final destination seemed to be indefinitely postponed. Pope Francis is very particular about this. He is always reminding consecrated persons, do not trust in your own strength regarding the future. We hear that, but we don't understand the deeper message. The deeper message has to do with a certain disposition that is common among us. We want to be very sure about the future. But what the church is saying is, move from that paradigm. Because without God, there is no future. And where God leads you, we cannot tell you. Because just like the cloud that led the people of Israel, it is unpredictable. There are moments when it seems to be moving, and there are moments when it's stopping. And when it stops, you stop. Don't move. When it moves, you move. Don't stop. So it's almost like telling us to move away from that bourgeois mentality of stability. I hope you understand how strong that is. If you look at it, the consecrated life is identified today as a manifestation of everything that is wrong with the middle class. We want it to be sure. We want to be secure. But here is what's interesting, okay? What the church is saying is that we should actually be willing to be moving. In another document, Rejoice, the illustration is even more clear. Imagine, for example, that this rectangle that you see there is society at large. And imagine that the circle that you see right now is the church. And within the church, you have that triangle representing the hierarchical leadership. Let us say that this is who we are in this image, consecrated life. But look at the movement idealized by the church about us. Not fixed, not unmoving, or not just rotating around that particular circle of the church, but one that is moving in a very interesting way. Rejoice says the following about this movement. The more you unite yourself to Christ, the more He leads you out of yourself and leads you from making yourself the center and opens you to others. Follow the restless searching of St. Augustine. He did not stop. He did not give up. He did not withdraw into himself like those who have already arrived, but continued his search. The restlessness of seeking the truth, of seeking God, became restlessness to know Him even better and to come out of himself and make others know Him. It was precisely the restlessness of love. The consecrated life in its liminality is restless. It sometimes settles, but it also moves. It does not only move, it also settles. How are you so far? Okay, in terms now of scope, just being mindful of time. The scope, let me just put that again. The scope being advocated by the church is peripheral. Peripheral. This is a word that you will hear being referred to a lot by Pope Francis. Periphery. Go to the periphery. Okay? So instead of being simply engaged in traditional ministries, in familiar ministries, we are supposed to reach out to the peripheries. This is how it is explained in Proclaim. From locating itself in the center of societies, engaging in traditional ministries, the consecrated life today is called to embrace new poverties and to have the peripheries in their heart, where it becomes, a messenger of joy, the joy of the gospel to those who dwell there in situations of misery and oppression, doubt and discomfort, fear and loneliness, showing that God's tenderness and His grief for the suffering of His children knows no limit. The church is asking us to broaden our imagination because we are stuck with traditional ministries while the world is crying in anguish because of new poverties. Self-understanding. From generic, we are called to a non-generic understanding of the consecrated life. By non-generic, this is what it means in the document Fraternal Life in Community. From living their life of consecration and the common life in the same way, that is, through a colorless lowest common denominator, consecrated persons live the vows and fraternal life in accordance with their congregation's proper identity, in order to manifest to the church and society at large the beauty and fruitfulness of the many and various charisms inspired by the Holy Spirit within their religious family. What it means is this: to move out of the mentality that what is good for one congregation is also good for mine. We cannot live in that mentality. It's a very strong mentality, particularly among young consecrated persons. We want what a group of sisters are doing in their community to be done by us, even if it is not one that is in accordance with the uniqueness of our charismatic identity. If we are truly living the charismatic dimension of the new paradigm, we are living the uniqueness of each of our congregation. Next, we're almost at the end. Governance. From pyramid. The new paradigm is quite interesting. Service of authority. You will note that in documents of the church, that the documents hardly, very hardly, use the term leadership. Because it sees the word leadership as a very secularized term. Okay? What the church is saying is that in a religious community, what exists is service of authority. And what it means is this: from seeing themselves as mere decision makers and administrators, persons in the service of authority are called to cultivate in themselves an openness to listening to those that they are leading, paying attention to each member of the community and to his or her growth, nurturing sincere affection towards all, and to inspire courage and hope in the midst of difficulties by helping them in accepting the difficulties of the present moment. In fact, what you will see in New Wine in New Wineskins is a reverberation of a particular position in the instruction on formation. Everyone is supposed to be formed to the service of authority. Everyone is supposed to be formed in the service of authority, because each of us may one day be called to the service of authority. What it means is to move from a certain way of thinking that only those with administrative skills are possible leaders of the community. That's why the church does not use the term leadership, because the term leadership connotes that there are those in the community that have been given the skill to be administrators. And usually these are the people that we elect or that we appoint. But what the church is saying is, no, every member of the community must be formed so that one day they can be in the service of authority. The last one, relational dynamics. This is the one that makes everyone nervous, but it's one that is very clear in the messages of Pope Francis. From a stratified relational dynamics, we are called to a post-clerical relational dynamics. Because even if you are in a congregation that is not clerical, you might be living a very clerical lifestyle. Even if you're sisters, it might be a clerical dynamic. Even if you're brothers, you're living a clerical dynamics. But what the church is saying is that we cannot combine clericalism with the consecrated life. They are completely opposed to each other. By post-clerical, this is what it means. Because the consecrated life, according to canon law, is essentially not clerical. It recognizes the evil of clericalism and its ugliness, and refuses to be seduced by it or to form its members with a clerical mindset. Instead, the consecrated life today aims to establish among its members a way of relating based on equal dignity and becoming experts in living in communion with each other. So there you go. The current paradigms. And let me conclude this session by stating this. Our congregations, therefore, are all being called to embody this new paradigm, this new wineskins of the consecrated life. It is in this new wineskins that our congregations are supposed to be molded and recreated. And what's important now for us to go into is the next allegory, the new wine. Okay? So from talking about the new wineskin, we are now supposed to talk about the new wine. Okay? And again, what's interesting is this. Instead of being direct to the point about what constitutes the new wine, what the document does is to talk about what is not the new wine. So what's interesting is this, okay? In this new wineskins that we have discussed, it is in this new wineskins that we have discussed that we are called to pour the new wine of the post-conciliar consecrated life. That new wine is manifested in renewed practices and ideas that we are called to exercise in our congregations. So, we are supposed to put into the new wineskins the new wine of the consecrated life in the post-conciliar times. In fact, the document invites consecrated persons in every religious institute or society of apostolic life to discern the quality and the level of maturity of the new wine which has been produced in their congregation during the long season of post-conciliar renewal. Okay? What we are being asked as congregations is to pause. Okay? And in pausing, we are supposed to discern if we are producing the new wine of the consecrated life that can fit into the new wineskins. Remember the parable. If you put old wine into the new wineskin, the consequence is that it will burst. New wine, therefore, is for new wineskins. So therefore, in elaborating how the new wineskins are understood by the church, we are now being asked to discern whether what we are going to put in the new wineskins are new wine that would fit properly into these new wineskins. So that's quite interesting because one cannot ignore something. And it is that between the Second Vatican Council and 2015, there were 50 years of experiences and experimentations within the consecrated life that continue to affect us today. In some congregations, the ramifications of these experiences and experimentations are still being strongly felt. Okay? Let's try to look at what are these experiences. Okay? Perhaps all would have been fine if after the Second Vatican Council, things were still actually operating in such a way that there seemingly was a plausible future for religious congregations. But we all know that the first major experience after the council was the precipitous hemorrhaging of vocations worldwide. In my own congregation in 1969, we saw the dramatic drop of the number from 800, the highest that we ever achieved, 872. By 1970, we were down to 620. So many of our members left. And that's not even counting those that died. But the experience in my congregation is an experience that happened in many congregations. And I think for those of us that are older enough, by the way, I'm 50, okay? Let's that not be clear to everyone. I'm old, okay? I see myself as old. Those of us that are old enough, we saw a lot of these things happen. Okay? In my own congregation, or at least in the minor seminary before I joined my congregation, in one day we lost 20. 20 left. So, and this was in 1984. So, many of us who are old enough saw the departure of so many from the consecrated life. And we cannot say that that was not traumatic. That was a traumatic experience for many of us. And we're still either reeling from it or are reacting to it. Okay? During the term likewise of Pope John Paul II, consecrated persons began to divide themselves between those who were progressive or conservative in their theology and praxis. And this was particularly seen during the long term of Pope John Paul II. In the United States, to be more particular, this was one that was very obvious, okay? The division, in particular, of the Conference for Women into two groups, simply because they were belonging to two very different theological spectrums. And that affected many consecrated persons in the United States, but even for those of us that have been receiving education and formation from these sisters, we are indirectly affected by them. Likewise, 25 years after the council, the consecrated life suffered a severe blow when the abuse of children and vulnerable adults by consecrated persons began to surface in Canada, Australia, and Ireland. Okay? Some of our congregations are really traumatized by this. And it's both male congregation and women congregations. Okay? Now it's all over the world. Okay? So what initially began in Canada, now is a worldwide experience. Okay? In some places, as one member of the Pious Disciples of Divine Master told me that when she was in Spain, she, unlike some other sisters, continued to wear the habit. And she was spat upon by someone. And then she was called abuser. So it's something that we experience. Perhaps not some of us individually, but we know that it's there. Okay? Whatever was that particular so-called respect for the consecrated life have dissipated in many parts of the world because of this particular issue. Likewise, we can look at the experimentations that have taken place during this period between the Council and 2015. Among the earliest experimentations that would affect the future of the consecrated life is the allowing of consecrated persons to live alone outside an actual community for a prolonged period of time. And what's interesting is that many consecrated persons are still in this particular situation, and the Holy See is very concerned that it gets perpetuated, even though initially it was just an experimentation. Then, coupled with this, there was also the observable growth in the acquisition of professional degrees among consecrated persons. There's nothing wrong about obtaining a professional degree. In fact, that was something that Perfecta Caritatis insisted upon, that in whatever ministry we are engaged in, we have to be professional about it. The observation, however, is that some of us are acquiring too many of these professional degrees, even if they are not related to what we are doing. Then, finally, there was also the direct involvement of many consecrated persons in shaping the political life of their countries. Again, not really an issue because we are supposed to be involved in politics in the small p, meaning we are all supposed to be involved, according to the teachings of the church, in the transformation of our society. The problem was when consecrated persons themselves became politicians. Okay? And this is one of those issues that the church continues to reckon with. Okay? So, without directly critiquing these experimentations, New Wine in New Wineskin reminds its readers that the gospel's message cannot be reduced to something purely sociological. Now that is a very rich statement. Okay, there is always going to be the temptation on our part, because of our exposure to sociology, to read what's going on in the world and respond to it through sociological means, and that's okay. But if we are thinking that it's only through sociological tools and other scientific tools that we can understand what's going on, then what the church is saying is that we are misleading ourselves. The point that's being raised by the document is this: a renewal which is incapable of affecting and changing structures as well as the heart does not bring about real and lasting change. When the church called for the renewal and adaptation of the consecrated life in the council, what was the unexpected result was that many of us began to understand the consecrated life in a way that seemingly was beginning to lose its transcendent dimension, and began to see our work as more of function than more of ministry. So what we can have, as stated in that statement, is that we may be in congregations that have a plentiful resource of members that are well-trained, structures that are adapting methods and means that are employed in institutions. And this may immediately make it look like we are congregations that are effective. But we know that even though we may have the signs of institutional effectivity, we know that if we examine deeply, there is trouble inside our communities. And the trouble is because there is no change of heart in the members. Change of thinking, but there's a change of doing, but there is no transformation in the heart of the members. And now, to continue the sentence of New Wine in New Wineskin, a warning, however: simply forcing change, no matter how generously done, can lead to rejection. The rejection entails the loss of the effervescence of the vital newness of the consecrated life. So it's a double-edged sword if you look at it. We are called to renewal, but at the same time, we have to be careful, because renewal can be understood as simply changing structures. And when renewal is understood merely as that, there will be a problem, because the consecrated persons within the community are not experiencing a renewal of heart that was expected in the council. In fact, in Perfecta Caritatis, it clearly mentions that no change is effective or going to be effective unless there is a renewal of spirit in the congregation. So it was quite prophetic in a lot of ways that the document foresaw a problem that might be encountered in the enthusiasm of religious congregations to adapt their life to the changing times after the council. So, the interesting point now is this, okay? When the document begins to also look at some of the things that have happened positively in the consecrated life after the council, we found ourselves facing new challenges. In number 7 of the document, it spells this out. First, it says, the rich multiplicity of ministries that the consecrated life has exercised in the last decades has undergone radical redimensioning due to social, economic, political, scientific, and technological evolution. The same goes for state appropriation of works historically associated with the consecrated life. So what's interesting is this, okay? Even if many of us are fighting to maintain the traditional ministries, changes in society that we cannot control are actually forcing us to reconsider our grip at these traditional ministries. Okay? Part of it is being mentioned in that last sentence. Many states, many countries, Kenya in particular, have already appropriated many of the works that were usually associated with us before the council. Schools, hospitals, dispensaries, okay? Works that were usually associated with us have been appropriated by the state themselves. And we are fighting with the governments for ministries that are associated with us, but maybe we are clinging too much to. And why is the document very particular about this? Because it's saying the following: new poverties have arisen in our world. And these new poverties should question the conscience of many consecrated persons and press them to respond in new and generous ways to these new situations and, a beautiful phrase, the new rejects of history. That's a very beautiful line. We are confronted as consecrated persons with new poverties and the new rejects of society. The problem is that we are not paying attention. We want to hold on. We want to hold on to what we are used to the old paradigm. Okay? So, this is quite interesting if you look at it. I'm sorry, all right. The document notes that despite the needs that new poverties and new and unprecedented emergencies have caused to explode in our time, consecrated persons still have not responded to them, and they continue to knock at the door of the creative fidelity of all forms of consecrated life. Think about it. It is the judgment of the church that we are not responding to the new challenges that are before us. We choose to be comfortable in the ministries that we are used to. And yet there are new rejects in society that are knocking on our door, but we are still unmoved. And that is a very strong statement on the part of the church regarding the state of the consecrated life. Okay? Now, to make the complication even further, the document notices the following. So many congregations, particularly those of women, and get used to this phrase because it comes out a lot of time, particularly those of women. Not me, it's a document. Have begun prioritizing foundations in the young churches, moving from almost exclusive monocultural situations to ones with multicultural challenges. This is not a critique, okay? This is a reality that the church has seen. Many congregations, particularly those of women, have found themselves established in societies where if they were once a monocultural congregation, they're opening themselves to a new reality, and that is multiculturality. Okay? Now, these challenges before us, okay, are very evident, okay, because they have immediate results on us. Internationalized communities have begun to emerge. Some of us belong to congregations in which 25 years ago, the members of our congregation belonged to just one nation or one culture. Okay? Or maybe even 50 years ago to be more safe. But now, we cannot deny that the majority of congregations are internationalized. Okay? Experiences of ministry and presence have been initiated by these communities in unknown or multi-religious contexts. And in fact, new communities have been inserted into difficult environments, often at the risk of various forms of violence. This is a reality that exists in the church today. Okay? But because of all these challenges that are before us, okay, changes are needed. And these are changes that are needed, which are supposed to bring tremendous enrichment to the congregations. Okay? But these changes, however, have put into crisis traditional formation programs which were unsuitable for new vocations and new contexts. And this is an emerging problem for many of our institutes. Okay? We have not changed our formation programs and try to insist that what works for one group should work in another group. But because the congregations where we are in are internationalized, we cannot apply that. In fact, you will see in the document one very strong statement. We can no longer apply the principle of one size fits all for all congregations. That's a very interesting phrase. One size fits all. What it means is this, okay? Formation programs that are catered in such a way that the formation program for one group is expected to work in another group is an illusion, according to the church. Formation programs have to be personalized. So I'm already giving you some issues that are coming out. We no longer are supposed to live in the idea that a one-size-fits-all formation program can be applicable in our internationalized context. It cannot. And that is a major challenge. More challenges to come, okay? So, we find ourselves, therefore, in a particular situation of challenges and changes. And these challenges and changes, according to the document, have been the source of tensions in religious congregations. At times, these tensions, according to the observation of the church, have reached a breaking point for institutes and societies, especially for those congregations with little missionary experience. For congregations that are missionary, there is already a disposition that is somehow imbibed in their culture regarding adaptability to changing cultures. But remember, it's not only congregations with a clear missio agentis vision that have actually become internationalized. Congregations that were not intended to be missionary have also become internationalized. And in the observation of the church, these are the congregations that are reaching a breaking point because they refuse to change. They refuse to adapt. I hope I'm not describing your congregation. So, to magnify the problem, the drop in membership brought by deaths and withdrawals, and this is very important, the unchecked rise in vocations from poor and developing countries brought many congregations into a state of listlessness and even panic. Okay? Because many of us found ourselves in a situation we did not foresee. Those members who belonged to cultures where most of the vocations come from are now the ones that are getting fewer. And meanwhile, those new members that are coming from the new cultures are the ones that are increasing. And many times we wanted to increase without checking whether or not these young men and young women do have the vocation to our particular congregation. We are obsessed too much with the numbers. And in being obsessed with the numbers, we found ourselves in a state of panic because, and no matter how racist it may sound, we know that it's being said in many quarters. We are afraid of entrusting the congregation to these new vocations. Where the fear is coming from is quite interesting. But we know this is a reality. We know that in the halls of our generalates, those murmurs exist. I know of one congregation, for example, where the bursar told me, and very straight to the point, we don't want to give the money to those Africans. We don't want to give the money of the congregation to those Africans. I was shocked when he said that. But he was really straight to the point. Now, I don't know what he meant by that, but it's a real feeling. Okay? And so now you find congregations in this particular funny situation. And some of us may be familiar with it. Okay? So what's quite interesting, therefore, is that we are finding ourselves, therefore, in a rapid and extensive change in our late modern society. It's changes that are in the society itself, but this chaotic and unforeseen changes have exposed the consecrated life to the challenges of continual adjustment. And this is usually where we are. We find ourselves as consecrated persons simply adjusting period after period to new challenges. It's like we're looking every time for new strategies in order to survive. And this is a major problem according to the document. In fact, you will find this particular comment, okay, in number 8. Many of those who are responsible for leading their brothers or sisters are almost completely wrapped up in day-to-day management. Or they are absorbed in containing problems rather than in envisioning itineraries. So leadership has been reduced to first aid or emergency responders instead of bringing life into the congregation. What has happened is that those in the service of authority are patching wounds here and there, and meanwhile the wounds are just exploding in every part of the body of the congregation. Now, this is where it's interesting. Okay? The document insists on this point. One cannot be simply satisfied with developing strategies for mere survival. We cannot continue living as congregations struggling to survive. We have to go beyond that. But the problem is that many of us are in congregations where it seems that we are always in red alert. And if the congregation is in that particular mentality, we cannot attend to the deeper issues that the congregation and the members have to attend to. Unfortunately, since this state of emergency has been the focus of many congregations, Vatican II's call to renewal and creativity was replaced instead by stagnation. And it seems for many congregations, there is no way out. So we find ourselves in this particular depressing situation. We are caught up in survival. And because of this, we cannot attend to the very deeper calls that we are called to. The symptom of this crisis, according to the document, is fatigue that is evident among many consecrated persons. We are tired. Interesting. Huh? The document is telling us not to deny that we are saying we're tired. How do you feel? But I hope you can see why the document is quite blunt. Okay? Many of us are in a state of fatigue and depression. Okay? Many of us are wondering what on earth is going to happen in the future. Okay? In this frantic effort, then, one might get the impression that the charismatic impulse of the council has failed. In fact, this is the reason why, for many of us, when we talk about charism, we don't want to go deep. We just want to give a statement. Our charism is to love God. Which is a sign that the congregation's members don't really know how to speak about their charism. We want it to be in the shortest way possible because we're tired of explaining ourselves. We're tired of trying to make sense about our presence. Okay? Fear of the future, therefore, has debilitated and devitalized the prophetic ministry that the consecrated life is called to exercise in the church for the good of all humanity. Look at that. Fear of the future. If you remember the paradigm, okay? From institutional stability, we are being called to liminality. But it's interesting, many of us want to hold on to stability. And because it's not stable, we're panicking. Okay? We have to have more candidates. Get all those people that want to join us, even if they don't have vocations. The numbers matter. This is an issue, okay? We are so afraid of the future. To be more blunt, one official told me, one official of the congregation, it's interesting that many congregations are afraid of death, when it is the most natural process in human life. Now, it's not saying that we should all commit suicide. But what's interesting is that in our fear of dying, we are actually trying to fight to maintain some stability in the congregation instead of embracing liminality. Instead of letting ourselves be restless before a God whom we continue to search. Stability has become more important for us in terms of institutions. But that fear is the reason for why the consecrated life's prophetic ministry has lost its vitality. We have lost the vitality. So, I hope you can understand why the document is strong. Huh? Yeah. So, therefore, what is the result of the fear? Because of our fear, many congregations have become self-referential and self-preserving in their attitude. Okay? But in doing so, we are simply taking on the old wineskins that the church is telling us to let go of. Because those old wineskins have no place in the consecrated life today. It's natural why we think that. Our congregations, according to our mind, was strong before Vatican II. After Vatican II, we have become weak. So the formula, let's go back to the way it was. Careful, okay? Because the document says this. Even in this new millennium, it's easy for us consecrated persons to succumb to the tendency to be totally open, to not be totally open to the newness of the gospel. Always lurking, according to the document, is the risk of falling into the temptation of reassuming the old habits of a world closed in on its own certainties and attitudes. What's interesting is that even those who have no awareness of how it was before the council or immediately after the council, many young consecrated persons are recoursing to this particular mentality. Let's be stable. So what's interesting is that we are all finding ourselves, in spite of the distance in our generations and cultures, we are finding ourselves advocating the same formula in order to reach that survival. And this is dangerous, according to the church. So, the church is saying that in the new wineskins of the consecrated life, we must put the new wine, not the old wine, the new wine. So, just put this forward, okay? In the midst of this state of fatigue and depression, the church counsels us that it is healthy and necessary to pause in order to discern the quality and the level of maturity of the new wine that has been produced during the long season of post-conciliar renewal. We're tired, we're depressed. That's good, that's fine. But the church says, pause, relax, come together as communities, and together assess the quality of the wine that your congregation has produced after the council. That's what the church is saying. Come together as communities to assess the wine, the quality of the wine that the congregation has produced after the council. Remember this, the new wineskin can only contain new wine. And that is the interesting thing. Because what we have to assess, according to the document, is quite interesting. Is the wine that we have produced really new wine? Or is the wine that we have produced rather